Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Love Task, a closer look with attachment theory in early adulthood. We're going to be looking at Adler's life tasks, specifically the love task, and how that affects people who are moving into early adulthood who are working to accomplish the love task. And we're going to be using attachment theory as a lens for that. So most of you probably remember who Alfred Adler was. He was an early psychoanalytic theorist who was a contemporary of Freud. He differed from Freud in that he veered from an analysis of intrapsychic forces to an analysis of interpersonal dynamics in a way that was context-based. And his individual psychology was his manner of investigating that. Adler devised three different tasks that applied to the various contexts in which a person pursued meaning in their relationships. And that was the love or intimacy task, the friendship task, and the work task. Adler held that these tasks were universal and cross-cultural, and that personality development is oriented around the accomplishment of these tasks. A person needed to develop a psychological capacity for empathy, for caring, for supporting, and for working together with others in order to accomplish these tasks. We're not really relying on Adler's psychological theories here. We're just plucking the love task out and then using other theories to examine the way people approach that task. So what is attachment theory? It is a psychosocial theory of development pioneered by John Bowlby. It claims that attachment systems are formed in early life and derived from early caregiver relations. These mental models influence the way that people govern their interpersonal relationships later in life. In theory, it bears the hallmark of a lot of contemporary psychoanalytic thought, like object relations. Freud would have said that the caregiver was the object. And it breaks these mental models up into a secure versus insecure paradigm. We'll take a closer look at that later. Emotionally focused therapy is a form of therapy that's based largely on attachment theory, although it is synthesized with things like systems theory and utilizes other experiential here and now elements from other therapies like Gestalt therapy. It uses interview and instruments to develop an understanding of a person's attachment style, and goals in this form of therapy often include achieving greater emotional intelligence, self-awareness, emotional range, etc. This is popular with couple and family counselors, but EFT theorists argue that there is broad application for this. The attachment styles seen here are secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized, and these develop based on a child's relationship with their primary caregiver, or what theorists describe as an attachment figure. A relationship with an attachment figure that is inconsistent can result in an anxious attachment style. A relationship that is marked by an attachment figure being almost completely unavailable for emotional support and other forms of support results in an avoidant style. A person with a very difficult childhood or difficult relationship with a caregiver, they might just develop into a disorganized pattern, which has elements of both. They may pursue emotional intimacy in an anxious way, but once it's offered, they may push it away and withdraw. And there are different theories as to why that is. A secure style is developed from a person who has a healthy relationship with their attachment figure that gives a fair amount of nurturing, but also encourages independence. Early adulthood as a critical juncture. Why is early adulthood a critical juncture for the life tasks, but specifically for the love task? Certainly people have jobs in high school and adolescence and also romantic relationships. But in early adulthood and also in emerging adulthood, that it kind of raises the ante a bit. There can be cultural expectations that a person take a harder look at a profession and make long-term decisions about job or college, and of course also relationships. Cultural expectations writ large or about a person's individual culture may create pressure to form an intimate relationship with a partner and marry and begin having children. And the way a person approaches this can be described through different psychosocial theories of development. Erikson's intimacy versus isolation developmental task is one that I prefer here. Erikson defines the crisis of establishing intimacy as the defining crisis of early adulthood, and requires a person to engage in a relationship with a person that shows support, affection, vulnerability, and is willing to show a person vulnerable parts of themselves in a way that, like their thoughts and feelings and emotion, without fear that their partner will leave them. And they have to engage in this sharing and connecting with another while maintaining a strong sense of their own self, not blurring the lines too much. The effects of an attachment style irritate that. An overly anxious partner might want to over-identify or blur those lines, whereas an avoidant partner might want to raise those boundaries between themselves and their partner and not engage in too much intimacy. And we can see this in Levinson's life structures as well. Levinson theorizes that as we move through life, we encounter tasks and challenges, and we create structures in life to help us navigate those challenges. But those structures bring with them their own sets of challenges. And Levinson theorizes that marriage is a structure that people create in order to navigate the challenges of intimacy and vulnerability. But with marriage comes its own set of challenges. Becoming maybe a co-household manager for the first time, or budgeting with someone for the first time, or just having a much close quarters relationship with someone, not just being married, but maybe moving in for the first time and experiencing some of these elements. An anxious style attachment will engage in some of the same over-identifying and blurring the lines and trying to merge by quickly identifying with the partner's life structure, such as maybe rushing to become friends with in-laws and friends, not in a manipulative way, but in a way that helps them manage their own anxiety. Whereas avoidance will show the same patterns of distance and withdrawal and reluctance to form meaningful relationships with their partners, friends and relatives, and relationships that are part of their life structure. Now, EFT in application. In therapy, a couple will usually get an initial interview and assessment by a therapist who is competent with this form of therapy. And they're trying to establish what their attachment pattern is. And they may give them certain questionnaires that ask them to rate how accessible, responsible, and responsive and engaged their partner is. And there are a number of other instruments that can be used to facilitate this. And once that's been established, or at least they have a rough sketch, they then begin the process of talk couples therapy to identify the cyclical patterns of behavior together as a couple with a therapist, to link behavior to attachment needs. And clients learn to recognize their own attachment needs and the attachment needs of their partner and the behaviors that are attached thereto. They also learn to experience the intentional expression of attachment needs in a very deliberate way, rather than in a reactive way that is reacting to their need to manage their anxieties about their relationships. This is a very helpful model that illustrates the cyclical pattern. This shows you the influence of systems theorists as well, who try to take emotions, translate the emotions into behaviors, and then put those behaviors into systems in a visual way that makes relationships easy to visualize. And the pursuer is representing the anxious style, and the withdrawer is representing the avoidant style. And what this would look like in therapy is that, say, a withdrawer would identify a behavior from a pursuer that scares them, makes them anxious, and causes them to withdraw. This pursuit of intimacy or vulnerability might scare them away a little bit. And they will learn to identify the deep primary emotions that are associated with that. Could be maybe fear of not being good enough. And maybe if too much intimacy or vulnerability is shown, they're afraid that their partner might realize that and not want them anymore. So there's this fear of loneliness or abandonment, which is tied to early caregiver relations. That fear manifests as a secondary emotion, which is anxiety, which influences the perceptions and attributions of their partner's behavior, which then leads to their own behavior of withdrawal. And for a withdrawer, this might look like shutting down, getting silent, stonewalling, or getting rational, introducing logic and intellect into a relationship to avoid the emotional aspects. And then that, of course, triggers here the attachment needs of the pursuer, which triggers their fear, their anxiety, their perceptions of their partner's behavior. It's only a matter of time before they leave. I'm not good enough. I'll never be good enough. I never have been good enough, and so on, which then triggers a behavior. It can be criticism, it can be anger, or it could be pursuing even harder out of fear of being alone. And this just exacerbates, goes round and round and round and round. What clients learn to do in therapy is to realize the way that their own anxieties has blinded them to the way that their behavior has affected their partner. And as they gain a greater awareness of this, they learn to manage their own emotions in the relationship with their partner in a very conscious and self-aware and deliberate way. They learn to slow this down and then learn to attend to the emotions of their partner. So in this case, a pursuer pursuing greater intimacy with a withdrawer may initiate that intimacy, whatever it may be, physical or emotional, but will also slow down and show some consideration for the way that it could be scary for the withdrawer, to acknowledge that and to let them know that there's no way that they can mess that up. And then the withdrawer might then acknowledge, yeah, I was scared about, who knows, scared about letting you down and not being good enough. And so I was putting distance between the two of us in order to avoid that situation. And just talking about that in a conscious way is something that that clients learn to do in therapy, and then import that progress into their relationships. They may still fight and have this little cycle, but they learn to recognize it and pull themselves out of it before it becomes devastating or demoralizing to the relationship. And this has been my TED Talk.